The sun never touched Raniganj. Even at noon, the air hung gray, heavy with coal and the breath of buried men. Smoke curled above the pits like ghosts pretending to be clouds. In the barracks, the sound of coughing was more constant than prayer. They said the earth was alive here, that if you pressed your ear to the ground, you could hear it eating. Men descended before dawn and returned when the world had already gone dark again. They walked into the earth like it was a factory and came out like it was a grave. The overseers wore white coats, their shoes polished clean, as if afraid the dust might teach them something. The British called it modern industry. The miners called it the hunger that breathes. There was no day or night in the shafts, only the rhythm of metal on stone. Every strike echoed like a heartbeat. Every heartbeat sounded like debt. When the lamps flickered, the men looked up not in fear of collapse but in hope that the darkness might finally finish the job the empire had started. The women worked above, hauling baskets of coal from dawn until the smell of smoke replaced the smell of rain. They wore no shoes, no gloves, only scars. Their children played in the dust, drawing circles in the soot. When asked what they were doing, one boy said, "We are building the sun." He had never seen it. In the evenings, they sat in rows outside the barracks, faces lit by firelight. No one spoke. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was obedience turned to stone. The overseer's whistle would sound, and the silence would stand, bow, and walk back into the dark. That was life in Raniganj. That was order. Asha worked in the sorting yard, 23, small, with hands that no longer healed. She was born in the mine's shadow and raised on its promises, food for work, work for life. The food was never enough, and life was always shorter than the debt. But she had something no one else did, a voice that never learned to whisper. When she spoke, others looked around first, making sure no one important was near. She didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't plead. Her words were calm, but they carried a weight that felt heavier than stone. It wasn't rebellion. It was something older, the quiet refusal to disappear. The first time she was noticed was over a loaf of bread. 2 children fought for it. One older man stepped in, took both halves, and handed one to her. She broke it again, giving equal pieces to both children. The man laughed. "You'll die hungry, girl." She said, "We all will, but not today." The words lingered long after the bread was gone. Rain never reached Raniganj without permission. The dust swallowed it before it could touch the ground. When the air grew too dry, the workers licked their palms before swinging their picks, a superstition they called feeding the mine. It never helped, but it reminded them they were still flesh, not machinery. Every month, the company doctor visited. He carried a notebook and a bottle of quinine. The notebook was for the dead, the quinine was for the officers. The miners called him the priest of numbers. When Asha's friend Rani coughed blood into her hands, the doctor said she was lucky. "A slow death earns you rest," Rani laughed until she couldn't. That night, Asha sat beside her, the lantern between them. Rani's breath rattled like gravel. "Do you think God sees this?" she asked. Asha stared into the flame. "If he does," she said, "he must be blind from the smoke." The next morning, Rani was gone. The overseers didn't stop work. They simply marked her number off the list. Asha carried the empty basket Rani used to hold. It felt heavier than coal. At sunset, the sky turned the color of rust. Asha looked toward the horizon, where smoke met the clouds. It looked like the world was being burned slowly, so the rich could stay warm. Someone beside her whispered, "We will all die here." She answered, "Then we must make the earth remember our names." No one replied, but heads turned. The silence had shifted, just slightly, the kind of silence that listens instead of obeys. That night, the overseer noticed the change. He called a meeting, shouting in English none of them understood. But anger, like hunger, doesn't need translation. The men were too tired to care. But Asha wasn't tired, not in the way they were. She felt something burning behind her ribs, not rage, not hope, just the knowledge that this pit, this system, this silence could not go on forever. She didn't yet know what she would do, only that she would not die digging for someone else's fire. Days passed. The mine went deeper. The air grew thinner. When one boy collapsed in the shaft, the overseer told them to leave him. "The mine will feed on him." Asha stopped swinging her pick. The others froze. The overseer raised his cane. "Work!" he shouted. She looked at him and said, "He's had enough." The cane cracked against her shoulder. The sound echoed off the walls like thunder in a coffin. She did not fall. She did not cry. She just turned her head slowly, blood running down her arm, and said, "So have we." That was the moment the silence broke, not with a shout, but with the absence of fear. The others stood, one by one, tools dropping to the ground like broken chains. The overseer backed away. He called for guards, but none came. Even the earth seemed to hold its breath. When she carried the boy's body out of the shaft, the sun was setting behind a curtain of smoke. For the first time, the workers saw her not as a woman, but as a direction. Someone whispered her name, Asha, and the name caught the wind like a spark. That night, she could not sleep. Her shoulder burned. The air smelled of rain that never arrived. From the barracks came the faint sound of someone humming, low, uncertain, human. Asha listened, and the pain began to fade. The next morning, when the whistle blew, no one moved. The overseer shouted, threatened, begged. Still, they stood. Dozens of men and women coated in black dust, eyes bright with something the empire had no word for. Then, quietly, Asha stepped forward. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence around her was no longer empty. It was waiting. She looked north, toward Calcutta, where the empire lived behind its windows and ledgers, and whispered, "If they will not come to see our hunger, we will carry it to their door." The miners nodded, some in disbelief, others in faith they didn't know they had. Behind her, the horizon shimmered with heat. 200 miles. The road was long, the sun merciless, the empire vast. But the silence had already broken. When the march began, it did not sound like rebellion. It sounded like footsteps, thousands of them, walking away from the grave they had been told was home. And somewhere beneath their feet, even the earth seemed to listen. The road began before dawn, when the stars were still hanging low like dying lanterns. Asha led without a word, her shoulder bandaged in torn cloth. Behind her, hundreds followed, barefoot, carrying baskets, pickaxes, empty bowls. They moved in silence, but every step made a sound the empire could not name. The first mile tasted like freedom and blood. Coal dust clung to their skin, turning sweat into mud. Some coughed, some stumbled, but no one stopped. The children walked between them, holding hands, their shadows stretching long across the dry earth. The march had no flag, no drums, only the heartbeat of hunger. They passed through the villages of the Damodar Valley, where the air smelled of wood smoke and fear. Farmers paused at their fields, eyes wide. One old man asked, "Where are you going?" Asha answered, "North." He shook his head. "There's nothing north but the city." She said, "Then let the city learn what the earth already knows." By midday, the heat shimmered off the road like a mirage. The marchers drank from ditches, ate what little grain they had, and kept moving. Their feet left dark prints in the dust, as if the land itself was keeping count. On the ridge above, 2 British officers watched through binoculars. "They'll scatter by night," one said. But hunger had learned how to travel. That evening, a child fainted. The crowd stopped. Asha lifted the girl, pressed her to her chest, and whispered something only the wind could hear. The others watched, waiting for her to command them to rest. Instead, she began walking again, slower now, but steady. The girl's head rested on her shoulder, her breath shallow but alive. The line followed, as if tied to her silence. The nights were colder than the mines. They slept in fields, using sacks for blankets, listening to the wind drag its fingers through the grass. Sometimes, from far away, they could hear trains, the sound of the empire's heartbeat, carrying coal to ports they would never see. The men looked toward the sound like prisoners listening to the footsteps of their guard. By the 3rd day, their food was gone. Hunger, once familiar, now grew sharp. The younger ones chewed on leaves, the older ones chewed on memories. But still, they walked. The rhythm became prayer. Left, right, the only music they could afford. In the town of Asansol, the police waited. 10 soldiers, rifles slung, sweat shining on their necks. They expected shouts, banners, chaos. Instead, they found silence. Asha approached the officer, her sari blackened with dust. He demanded, "What is this?" She said, "A march. A protest? A hunger." He hesitated. The rifles did not rise. The march passed through like wind through a broken door. The officer watched them go and felt something he couldn't explain. Not fear, not pity, just the sense that the ground beneath him had begun to move. That night, rain came without thunder. It fell in thin lines, tracing their faces, turning dust to clay. The marchers opened their mouths to the sky and drank. Some cried without knowing why. Asha sat alone beneath a tree, her hair plastered to her skin. She whispered to herself, "Even the rain walks with us." The next morning, the youngest miner, barely 12, limped and fell. His mother tried to lift him, but her arms shook. Asha bent down, touched his forehead, and said softly, "Sleep a while." Then she turned to the crowd. "We will walk for him." The boy smiled before closing his eyes. The road moved on. By the 6th day, blisters had opened into wounds. The smell of blood and sweat filled the air. Yet, somehow, the rhythm did not break. The line of marchers stretched for miles, a moving river of brown and red glinting under the sun. The empire had roads, they had direction. When they reached the railway crossing, a train thundered past, black smoke, iron wheels, shrieking steam. The march stopped. Asha watched it vanish into the horizon. "That is how they move our lives," she said quietly, fast, loud, and without seeing who carries it. The others nodded. No one spoke again for hours. News began to spread ahead of them. Whispers carried by traders, letters intercepted by clerks, hundreds of miners walking to Calcutta, women leading them, no violence, no fear. The newspapers in the city called them madmen. The officers called them trouble. The priests called them a storm. On the 7th night, fires burned low. The marchers huddled together for warmth. Asha sat apart, her back against a stone, staring at the moon. Its reflection trembled in a puddle by her feet. "Do you think they see us now?" a woman asked. Asha didn't look away from the water. "Not yet," she said, "but they will hear us soon." The following morning, they met soldiers again. This time, the road was blocked with wagons and guns. A British officer on horseback raised his hand. "Turn back," he said. Asha looked up at him, her eyes hollow but steady. "We have nowhere to return to," she said. "The mines belong to the dead." The officer hesitated. His horse shifted beneath him. Behind Asha, hundreds of faces stared in silence, not pleading, not threatening, just waiting. The air thickened. Somewhere, a baby cried. Asha took one step forward. The officer's hand trembled. Then he dropped it. "Let them pass," he muttered. They crossed the checkpoint without a word. On the other side, the wind picked up. Someone laughed. Someone else began to hum. It spread like wildfire, a low, rhythmic hum, slow as heartbeat, deep as soil. The soldiers watched them disappear into the horizon and did not speak. By the 10th day, the march had become a living thing. Every cough, every breath, every stumble belonged to everyone. The women took turns leading. The men followed in quiet awe. When the youngest girl lost her sandal, 50 others removed theirs. They walked until their shadows disappeared. And when the sun fell, the road still glowed, faintly, like coal beneath ash. The dust around their feet shimmered as if remembering fire. At night, Asha dreamed of footsteps, not hers, not the crowd's, but thousands more, behind and ahead, stretching beyond the edge of memory. When she woke, the dream did not fade. It followed her, walking in rhythm with her pulse. The empire, from its marble offices, called it a disturbance, but the land called it something else, a heartbeat. By the 12th day, the hunger no longer hurt. It had become something cleaner, sharper. They were no longer walking for food. They were walking as hunger itself, unstoppable, necessary, pure. As the city lights of Calcutta shimmered faintly on the horizon, Asha stopped. The crowd gathered around her, silent, expectant. She looked ahead and said, "The city does not know us, but the earth does. Keep walking." And they did, through dust, through rain, through fear and fatigue, until the sound of their feet became louder than the empire's silence. The soldiers in the outposts wrote in their logs, "The march continues north, still silent, still walking." They did not know what they were recording. They were documenting the sound of history learning to breathe. The road to Calcutta was longer than the map allowed. Every mile stretched like an hour. Every hour felt like a lifetime. The dust rose behind them, marking the sky with a gray scar that could be seen for miles. To the empire, it was a trail of disorder. To them, it was proof they still existed. The riverbeds had dried into cracked veins. They walked through villages where wells gave nothing but echo. When the children asked for water, their mothers scooped air into their hands and pretended it was enough. The world itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see if they would break first. Asha's shoulder had healed into a scar that glowed in the sun, a reminder of where the silence had ended. She no longer counted the days. The march had no calendar, only rhythm. Footfall after footfall, heartbeat after heartbeat, the sound of defiance made flesh. Somewhere along the 100th mile, a man named Karan fell. He was older, his beard matted with dust, his hands still clutching the handle of his pickaxe. "Go," he told them. "The road remembers us better than we remember ourselves." They buried him in the ditch beside the path, marking his grave with a bowl filled halfway with sand. That night, as they rested under a ruined temple, lightning crawled along the horizon. The air tasted of iron. Asha stood at the doorway, watching the storm creep closer. "Even the sky looks hungry," someone said. She nodded. "Then it will march with us." By dawn, the rain came. It was not gentle. It fell like stones, drumming against skin and soil. The marchers turned their faces upward, mouths open, catching each drop like salvation. When it ended, they were soaked but alive, their wounds clean, their eyes brighter. In the days that followed, the march grew. Villagers joined them, bringing rice, cloth, or simply footsteps. The line snaked across the countryside like a living river. Each new voice blended with the others until individuality disappeared. There was only the march itself, one body, one sound. But the empire noticed. The railways carried rumors faster than the feet could travel. British officers wrote telegrams. Mass of workers moving toward the capital, possible uprising, recommend interception. The recommendation became an order. At the edge of Burdwan, the road was blocked. Soldiers, rifles, bayonets, wagons, the empire had arrived to meet its hunger. The officer demanded they stop. Asha stepped forward, her sari stained with mud, her feet raw and cracked. "We can't stop," she said. "If we stop, we become what you built us to be." He lifted his rifle, then lowered it again. There were too many faces, too much silence. He could not shoot what looked like the earth itself rising to its feet. He turned away. The soldiers opened the road. The march moved on. Behind them, one soldier whispered, "They are walking through us." His commander didn't answer. He was busy staring at the ground, where their footprints glowed faintly red in the dusk. In Calcutta, newspapers began printing words they had never dared before. Strike, famine, march, woman leader. The editors debated whether it was revolution or madness. One British clerk wrote in the margin of a report, "This isn't politics, it's something older." By the 150th mile, exhaustion had become a companion, not an enemy. Men walked half asleep, women leaned on each other, children sang softly to the rhythm of the steps. The song had no words, only breath. But breath was enough. Asha herself grew quieter. She rarely spoke now. When people asked what they should do when they reached the city, she answered, "Let them see us." That was all. Visibility was the only weapon she trusted. At dusk, they crossed a field of burned sugarcane. The air smelled of sweetness and ash. One of the miners looked around and said, "They burn the harvest when it isn't theirs." Asha said, "So we will make hunger theirs too." The words spread like wind through the line. That night, when they camped beside the railway, a train passed. Inside, English passengers stared through the windows at the dark shapes below. To them, it was only scenery, nameless, faceless, brown. But one young girl inside the carriage pressed her palm to the glass. Asha saw it glint in the light of the fire. Two worlds stared at each other for a heartbeat, then the train was gone. By morning, the marchers found a letter pinned to a tree, written in English, unsigned, "Keep walking. The city listens." No one knew who had left it, but the message spread faster than food. Even hunger seemed to soften its hold for a moment. When they reached the river again, they found the bridge collapsed, washed away by the rain. The current was strong, the water black with silt. Some said turn back, others said build rafts. Asha simply waded in. "The water is like work," she said. "It only kills you if you stop moving." One by one, they followed. The crossing took hours. They lost tools, baskets, a few shoes, but no one drowned. When they reached the other side, the sun was setting red behind them. Someone laughed, wild and exhausted. "We've crossed the empire," Asha smiled faintly. "Not yet," she said, "but the empire has begun to cross us." At night, the fires burned higher than before. The march had changed. It no longer crept. It advanced. People in villages began to wait for it, leaving food and water by the roadside. When the marchers passed, they bowed their heads as though watching a procession of saints. The British administration called it contagion, an emotional epidemic. But even their words carried a kind of fear. You cannot quarantine the sound of footsteps. By the 20th day, the marchers' bodies were thin as shadows. Yet their eyes, those eyes were alive with something the empire could not measure. They had begun to believe that hunger could speak, and that maybe, just maybe, the world might finally listen. At the last village before Calcutta, the local police chief came out to meet them. He was Indian, wearing the empire's uniform, his badge dull with sweat. He said, "Turn back. They will beat you, jail you, forget you." Asha looked at him gently. "They already did. We're only walking to remind them." He lowered his gaze. When he looked up, the march was already passing him by, silent, unstoppable. The dust covered his boots, and for a moment he thought he heard his own heartbeat fall into their rhythm. That night, Asha stood alone at the edge of camp. The lights of Calcutta flickered faintly on the horizon, like stars trapped under glass. She whispered, "We are close." The wind answered with the sound of waves, the hum of a city that had forgotten where its food came from. She lay down on the hard ground, staring at the sky. Every star looked like an ember waiting for breath. She thought of the mines, of Rani, of the boy who had fallen, of the earth that had swallowed their names. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we give the sky back its color." The next morning, when the first light broke over the plain, the march began again. Bare feet, empty bowls, steady rhythm. The road ahead was no longer just a direction, it was a question. And somewhere, far behind them, the wind whispered the answer, "Keep walking." They did, and as they entered the outskirts of Calcutta, the empire's heart began to shake, not from fear of violence, but from the sound of thousands of lives remembering what it meant to be alive. The city announced itself long before they saw it. Smoke rose in columns, trains screamed, horns echoed through the haze. Calcutta, the jewel of the empire, stood waiting, unaware that hunger was walking toward its gates. The marchers crossed the last stretch of open plain. Behind them, 200 miles of dust. Before them, a skyline of factories, chimneys, and steeples, the empire's lungs. The air smelled of iron and rain. Asha slowed her pace, her eyes fixed on the bridge ahead, the Howrah, spanning the river like a scar of steel. The bridge was guarded. Soldiers stood in neat lines, rifles gleaming, faces pale under the sun. Civilians watched from the banks, merchants, clerks, beggars, all drawn by the rumor, the coal people are coming. They had been called many things before, but never that. Asha stepped forward. Her sari clung to her body, soaked in sweat and dust. Behind her, the crowd stopped. The river below glimmered darkly, as though reflecting another sky. The officer at the bridge called out, "Who commands this?" Asha raised her head. "Hunger," she said. He laughed, the brittle laugh of a man who didn't know how to face something that couldn't be arrested. "This bridge is closed," he said. She took one step forward. "Then close the river." The soldiers tightened their grips. The officer hesitated. He could not tell if the stillness before him was peace or pressure. When Asha raised her hand, thousands behind her did the same, palms open, empty, waiting. The gesture spread like fire through dry grass. The wind shifted. A faint hum began, low, rhythmic. The sound of breath turned into purpose. It grew, rolling across the bridge like a tide. The officer shouted again, but his voice drowned in the sound of feet, soft, deliberate, countless. He stepped back. "Let them pass," someone murmured. The line opened. The crowd began to move. They crossed the bridge slowly, not as invaders but as witnesses. Below, the river carried reflections of their faces, ordinary, unarmed, unyielding. On the other side, the city was not ready. The British officials watched from balconies, their teacups trembling. The newspapers wrote, "A column of miners enters Calcutta. No weapons, no chants, only silence." It was the first time the city had heard silence so loud. As they moved through the streets, people stopped working. Factory horns fell quiet. Vendors left their stalls. The march passed like a storm with no rain, invisible yet inescapable. Dust clung to marble walls. Hunger had come home. Asha led them to the courthouse square, a wide space of stone and shadow, the heart of imperial law. The crowd filled it until there was no room left for distance. Policemen surrounded them, waiting for orders that never came. The governor's carriage stopped at the far end of the plaza. He stepped out, white uniform bright against the soot-stained crowd. "What do you want?" he called, his voice carried, sharp, official. Asha looked at him, then at the crowd. Her voice was hoarse, almost gone, but steady. "We want you to see us." He frowned. "You have been seen, now disperse." She shook her head. "Seeing is not knowing." The crowd began to murmur, not in anger, but agreement. The sound rose, the soft percussion of thousands of lives pressing against the boundaries of empire. Asha climbed the courthouse steps. Her knees shook, but she stood tall. Her voice cracked the air. "We are not here to beg. We are here to return what you gave us. Hunger, fear, obedience. Take them back. We have no use for them anymore." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The governor's aide whispered something, but his words dissolved in the air. Then, from somewhere deep in the crowd, came a single clap. One, then another, then hundreds, then thousands. The sound rolled through the square like thunder over dry fields. The soldiers flinched. The governor stepped back. Calcutta had not heard applause like that in generations. It was not celebration, it was recognition. Asha stood still, her eyes closed, her arms at her sides. She wasn't smiling. She looked tired, hollow, but the kind of tired that means something has finally begun. When the police advanced, she didn't resist. They grabbed her wrists, pushed her to the ground. The crowd didn't fight. They only watched, silent again, but this silence was different. It was no longer obedience, it was promise. As they dragged her away, she said quietly, "You can arrest hunger, but not the road it walks on." That night, the jails overflowed. Dozens were taken. Hundreds refused to leave the square. The officials called it containment. The workers called it arrival. In the governor's report, one line stood alone. The miners refused food. They sang instead. He did not mention that he had heard the song even from his office, faint but unending. The next morning, the newspapers printed her name, Asha Devi, woman agitator. Beneath it, a single sentence, she said, "Hunger has eyes." The editor crossed it out before printing, but the typesetter left a trace of ink. Every copy bore the ghost of her words. Inside her cell, she wrote on the wall with coal dust, "The stomach is not a weapon, but it can be a drum." She tapped the rhythm, once, twice, 3 times. The guards told her to stop. She smiled and kept tapping. Outside, the marchers camped in the streets. They held empty bowls up to the sky, not asking, just remembering. When the rain came that night, the bowls filled, and no one drank. They let the water stand, glimmering, a mirror for the city to see itself. In the following days, the empire moved fast. Orders were issued, curfews declared, but hunger moves faster than ink. The idea spread, from dock workers to weavers to factory hands. They began tapping, softly, on tables, on walls, on the ground. Asha's rhythm, 3 beats. It was not a song, it was memory finding its shape. The governor wrote to London, "This is not rebellion, but it feels worse." The reply came weeks later, "Silence it." But you cannot silence something that has learned to breathe. When they released Asha weeks later, she walked out of the jail barefoot. No one greeted her, but the road did. It waited, patient, unfinished. She turned toward the horizon, her eyes dark, her steps slow. The guards expected her to stop at the gate. She didn't. That night, in the alleys of Calcutta, someone began to hum again, low, rhythmic, steady, then another, then another. The city that had built itself on obedience now vibrated with the quiet pulse of refusal. The march had ended, but its echo had not. The bridge still stood, silent and proud, spanning the river that had carried them here. On nights when the wind was right, it hummed faintly, 3 slow beats against the iron. The empire called it coincidence, the miners called it a heartbeat. And somewhere in the dark, the sound went on. The city did not wake the next morning. It lingered between dream and shame. The streets smelled of wet dust and burnt coal. Newspapers lay on doorsteps, their ink still damp, carrying her name like a rumor the empire wished it hadn't heard. Asha Devi, woman agitator, disturber of peace. The words sounded official, but the faces in the city read them differently. Some whispered her name as if it were a warning, others like a prayer. The courthouse square was empty now, but the echo of footsteps remained. Children played there, tapping sticks on the stone in patterns they didn't understand. Vendors said the sound unnerved them, too steady, too human. At night, even the guards avoided that place. They said the air felt crowded. Factories reopened, machines screamed, and yet the rhythm beneath the noise did not fade. Somewhere inside every clang of metal, there was a heartbeat. Somewhere in every worker's breath, a memory of walking. In the government office, the governor dictated a statement. The situation has been contained. No further unrest expected. But as his secretary wrote, the ink trembled, forming faint dots along the page, 3 of them evenly spaced. The rhythm had followed even him. The press printed new headlines: "City restored," "Peace returns." But on the back pages, small notices appeared: dock workers refusing shipments, textile women leaving looms at noon, mill laborers standing in silence for 3 minutes before the shift bell. Each act lasted no longer than a breath, yet it spread like smoke through dry grass. They called it the Quiet Strike. It had no leaders, no slogans, no flags, only rhythm. In some places, it began with the sound of spoons tapping on tin plates, in others, with footsteps walking nowhere. It was not rebellion, it was remembrance. The police grew uneasy. They preferred noise, something they could charge, disperse, punish. But this silence had no address. Arrest 1 and 2 more simply stopped working. Jail 10, and the streets grew stiller. The empire mistook stillness for control. It was, instead, the sound of breath being held before the next exhale. Asha's cell remained locked, though she was gone. On the wall, the line she wrote, "The stomach is not a weapon, but it can be a drum," had been scrubbed away 3 times. Each morning, the words returned, faintly, in gray smudges of coal dust. The guards stopped trying. In the tea shops, men debated what it meant. "It's just superstition," some said. "It's a warning," said others. A poet who passed by wrote it in his notebook. A week later, it appeared in print, disguised as verse, carried across the empire by students who whispered her words in classrooms and back alleys. The British press in London called it a minor disturbance. They printed a map of India with a red line tracing the march's route. To them, it was only distance. To those who had walked it, it was a wound that had learned to heal by moving. In Calcutta's slums, women began to tap 3 times before kneading dough. Miners in Bengal tapped 3 times before entering shafts. Porters in Bombay tapped 3 times before lifting loads. None of them spoke of it. But when strangers met eyes in the market and shared the rhythm, they nodded, quietly, knowingly. The empire's reports grew thicker. Unrest contained, discipline reinforced, loyalty restored. Each report ended with the same phrase: minor irregularities persist. Those irregularities were people breathing differently. One evening, a group of factory workers left their machines and gathered at the riverbank. They brought nothing but bowls, the same kind they ate from, the same kind Asha had lifted to the rain. They placed them in the water and watched as the current carried them away. No speeches, no cries, just the soft clinking of metal on water. When word reached the authorities, the officer in charge asked, "What law did they break?" No one answered. There was no law against remembrance. Weeks passed. The marchers dispersed, returning to mines, villages, docks. But they were not the same. Their silence carried weight now, a gravity that bent even words around it. Hunger had turned from pain into principle. In the mines, foremen noticed workers looking at the clock differently, not counting hours, but listening. In the mills, overseers complained that the air felt heavy, that the workers' silence pressed against the walls. In truth, it was not silence, it was patience, the kind that no empire knows how to measure. Asha's name traveled farther than she ever had, to Bombay, Madras, Lahore. Some said she was dead. Others swore she'd been seen walking along the old road, her feet bare, her shadow long. The empire dismissed both stories, but even the officials began to dream. Dreams of footsteps on wet stone, of a voice whispering, "Keep walking." By the monsoon's return, the city had grown quieter, not from peace, but from exhaustion. The governor wrote again to London. The disturbances are psychological, contagious, and invisible. The reply came colder. Starvation is cheaper than sympathy. But sympathy had already changed its shape. It lived in the sound of workers tapping, in women carrying water, in the gaze shared by strangers on trams. The hunger had become invisible, yes, but it was everywhere. When the rain flooded the lower streets, the bowls from the river returned. They floated through alleyways, bumping against steps and doors. Some carried flowers, some carried ash. A few carried words scratched into tin. Keep walking. The city pretended not to see them, but the children followed, splashing through the water, laughing. They said the bowls were looking for their owner. At night, the bridge hummed again. 3 slow beats, then silence. The empire called it wind, the workers called it memory, the city called it Asha. And under the hum of trams, the whine of engines, and the ticking of clocks, the same rhythm kept beating, quiet, endless, unstoppable. The city had learned its lesson. Hunger, once heard, never stopped speaking. The prison kept no record of her release. The entry in the book ended mid-sentence. Asha Devi, transferred. Then nothing. The guard said she walked out one morning and never looked back. Others said she was sent to the north. The truth was simpler. She had already become too large to contain. The rhythm remained. The first to hear it were the textile women of Calcutta. Bent over their looms, they began tapping the wooden frames, 3 slow beats. The overseer shouted, thinking it was mockery. The women said nothing. The sound spread across the hall, then to the next floor, then to the next factory. Within a week, the whole district was drumming. The British called it nuisance. The merchants called it madness, but the police reports grew longer. No shouting, no banners, only this rhythmic sound. They tried to ban gatherings, but you cannot outlaw a heartbeat. When the mills closed, the sound moved to the docks. Men waiting for ships struck the sides of crates. Farmers in Bihar beat their palms against the earth before planting. Miners tapped on the rock walls before descending. Every beat said the same thing. We are still here. It wasn't a movement. Movements have leaders, names, endings. This was something else, a memory that had learned rhythm. In the markets, people began using the phrase Asha's time. It meant the moment before courage, the pause before doing something no one else dared. To speak it was to acknowledge hunger not as shame, but as proof of life. The empire watched, puzzled. The reports described behavioral mimicry, collective delusion, premonitory unrest. They missed the simplest truth. Sound travels faster than orders. Some nights, British officers stationed in Bengal swore they heard the rhythm in their sleep. 3 slow taps on the walls, as if the building itself remembered. One resigned, writing, "The silence here breathes. I cannot work among the dead who refuse to die." By 1914, the rhythm had reached Bombay. Dockhands waiting for ships began tapping the wooden rails. Sailors carried it overseas, humming softly under their breath. It crossed oceans in the hulls of steamers, entered ports in Africa, the Caribbean, the Mediterranean. No one knew its origin, only that it felt ancient and alive. Back in India, artists began painting bowls, feet, roads. Poems appeared with titles like "The Woman Who Walked on Hunger." None of them mentioned her name. They didn't need to. The story had become shape, sound, breath. In a school near Madras, a teacher asked her students what freedom meant. A girl of 8 stood up and said, "When the stomach stops being afraid." The teacher didn't know where she'd heard it. It didn't matter. The words belonged to everyone now. The empire tried to drown it with noise, parades, announcements, slogans. But noise is heavy, rhythm is light. It slips through cracks, moves through crowds, hides in footsteps. It doesn't ask permission. It only asks to be heard once. One officer in Calcutta, weary from years of reports, wrote privately to a friend, "We have built a wall against the wind. The wall stands, but the air moves through it." In the coal towns, Asha's old comrades were gone or dying, but their children grew up hearing the stories. She made them walk, they said. She made them see. Each generation added something. Her eyes were bright as fire. Her voice could stop bullets. Her footsteps cracked the earth. Legends are what truth becomes when it refuses to die. One rainy evening, a railway worker found a tin bowl washed up near the tracks. Inside, carved crudely, were 3 dots. He didn't understand, but he took it home. His wife used it for rice. Each night before eating, she tapped it 3 times with her spoon. Their children learned to do the same. By the time anyone asked where it came from, the meaning had already returned. In Delhi, students marched in silence to protest taxes. They carried no signs. When asked their purpose, they tapped 3 times on the steps of Parliament. A reporter wrote, "They said nothing, yet the air shook." The government responded with arrests. Silence met violence. Violence met the void. Each blow fell into rhythm. Each prisoner joined the song. Even chains have tempo. By 1918, the rhythm was everywhere. On the roads, in the temples, in the quiet between machine noises. The British officers stopped writing reports. They began using one word: persistent. At night, in villages where no one could read or write, old women told stories by firelight of a girl who walked until the world had to listen. She didn't carry a flag, they said. She carried hunger on her back, and it never broke. When someone asked her name, the storytellers smiled. The name changes, they said. The walking stays. Years later, when the empire finally loosened its grip, leaders spoke of politics and war, of treaties and independence. None mentioned her. But when the celebrations ended, when the fireworks died and the people returned to their homes, the wind carried a soft sound through the streets. 3 quiet beats, then silence. Children asked what it was. Their elders said, "That is how freedom breathes." Somewhere deep underground, in a forgotten shaft near Raniganj, miners still tap the walls before they dig. They say it keeps them safe, but when the sound travels down the tunnels, it doesn't echo like stone. It sounds like footsteps, and sometimes when the wind moves through the vents, it carries words faint as dust. The march never stopped. History forgot her name before it learned to pronounce it. Textbooks called it a minor labor disturbance. The archives kept one photograph, a blurred crowd, a woman at the front, her face turned away. The caption read, "Unidentified agitators, Calcutta, 1913. But memory does not obey ink. It moves through sound, gesture, habit. It hides in the rhythm of those who never stopped walking. Even now, when trains thunder through Bengal, their wheels beat 3 times before fading into the distance, echoing a heartbeat older than rails. The empire fell, as empires do. Flags changed, languages shifted, but the hunger stayed. Freedom came, heavy with ceremony and speeches. Then, factories reopened. The dust rose again. The faces at the gates were the same, only the uniforms had changed. Asha's story dissolved into rumor, then into silence. But silence, as she taught them, is never empty. It fills itself with footsteps, waiting. Every protest, every strike, every whispered refusal carried a trace of her. No monument bears her name, yet every road carries her dust. In the archives of Delhi, a historian once found an unsigned letter written in coal smudges. It read, "We walked because it was the only thing left that didn't belong to them. No date, no sender, just the rhythm of thought made visible." Through decades, the rhythm found new shapes. The clang of factory gates in 1946, the beating of metal cups during hunger strikes, the echo of feet in refugee camps. Each generation called it something different: courage, defiance, survival. But the rhythm knew better. It was all the same word, pronounced through time. In 1972, a filmmaker visited the ruins of the old mines near Raniganj. He found carvings on the rock, circles, dots, and a single word: walk. He never finished the film. The negatives melted in a fire the night before editing. Only one reel survived, 20 seconds of dust moving across empty ground. When played in reverse, it looked like footprints forming from nothing. By the 1980s, the rhythm had become pulse, the drumming of typewriters, the cadence of speeches, the chants in the streets. In one photograph from a protest in Delhi, a young woman raises her fist, her wrist wrapped with 3 threads, knotted tight. She doesn't know why she tied 3. She says it felt right. The march continued, invisible, incorruptible, through steel, through smoke, through silence. In classrooms, teachers spoke of Gandhi, of Nehru, of empires and treaties. But sometimes, during long afternoons, a student would tap a pencil 3 times on the desk, not knowing the reason, only sensing the weight of something beneath their skin. The rhythm reached places that had never known her name: London, Nairobi, Sao Paulo. Workers in warehouses stamped their boots in time. Women in textile factories clapped between shifts. The body remembers what the mind forgets. One journalist, writing in 1999, called it the Hunger Code. He traced it back to Bengal but found no origin, no founder, no leader. "It's not rebellion," he wrote, "it's recognition, the sound of the human stomach refusing to go silent." In 2013, a century after the march, a handful of students walked from Dhanbad to Calcutta, the same road, the same dust. They carried no banners, only bowls made of tin. At each town, they stopped to share food with miners' families. They called it "The Road Remembers." At night, one student wrote in her diary, "We keep saying hunger is absence, but it's not. It's presence. It's proof that something still refuses to die." The old bridge still stands, spanning the same dark river. The city has grown around it. Glass towers, traffic, noise. Yet some nights, when the wind shifts, you can hear the low hum of metal, a rhythm against the current. Engineers call it vibration, locals call it her. The coalfields she walked are now machines, vast pits carved by claws of iron. But workers still tap the trucks before dawn, 3 times softly. A superstition, they say, or respect or memory. Sometimes they argue about it. But when the sound spreads through the valley, no one talks, they just listen. Every generation believes it has invented defiance. Every generation forgets it is only repeating footsteps. The march does not end because hunger does not end. It changes shape, a protest, a strike, a whisper, a rhythm. Somewhere, someone still walks because they must. Someone still taps because they can. Someone still believes that silence is not surrender, it is the breath before speech. And when the night grows still, when the cities fall quiet and the machines rest, you can almost hear it, faint but sure, moving through the dust of the world. 3 beats, then silence. The story you've heard is not history, it's inheritance. Every time a voice is silenced, the rhythm begins again. Every time someone kneels in hunger, the road remembers the sound of footsteps. Freedom was never given, it was carried, across deserts, through prisons, through the empty space between one breath and the next. If her march reached you, even for a moment, don't let it stop here. Share her name, share her silence, share her fire. Because history doesn't repeat, we do, and the only way to end it is to keep walking. This is Slavery's Dark Past. Subscribe to remember and let the rhythm speak again.